John Wick. Expert killer, well-dressed, and loves dogs. Now, it's easy to see this iconic action hero as more of a weapon than a man. It's easy to get lost in the mesmerizing choreography and love these movies for no more than that, but these films have something more to say about masculinity, even if they are coated in a thick glaze of thrilling violence. It is a story of grief, love, and rebellion against social conventions that not only hits harder than most action movies, but also manages to find the tongue-in-cheek amusement to it all. 2014's John Wick stars Keanu Reeves as the titular retired hitman. After the death of his wife, he receives a puppy that she arranged for him to care for to cope with his loss. Soon after, John is targeted by the Russian gangster Iosef after refusing to sell his Mustang. Breaking into John's house, Iosef and his Russian henchmen steal the car and murder his dog, thus launching John's quest for revenge. The revenge in this movie is not one of conquest, but of grief. John is not fighting for a fallen associate or the loss of a mentor, but one that he has loved and lost. I'm not just talking about his dog, because it's not about the dog. Well, not really. I mean, it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. The dog is more of a vessel for John's grief, and it's a relatable vessel, as everybody loves dogs. From the book, They Shouldn't Have Killed His Dog, producer Basil Iwanek expanded on this appeal of the dead dog. Quote, "I thought to myself, oh my god, what if someone killed my dog and stole my car? I didn't go to the dog part. I always went to the idea of the wife's dying, leaves the dog to the husband and says, you need to keep loving in your life. Start with this." That was the element, that was the memory of his wife, and then that's killed. To me, anyone could understand that. Anyone could emotionally empathize with it. It's so tactile and down to earth. People who wouldn't normally watch an action movie would go to, oh my god, don't mess with my dog, I'd go off. And we got a lot of that. Messing with John immediately sends shockwaves through the world of hitmen. When Iosef tries to sell John's Mustang to Aurelio's chop shop, he refuses once he realizes it belongs to John Wick. Iosef has no clue who he has messed with, but his dad, Vigo, does. John has apparently completed an impossible task that was meant to grant him a safe exit from the criminal underworld. But now that Iosef has disturbed that peace, John must return to killing to make a point. It is a wrath that Vigo realizes is coming when he scorns his son and basically says, you're on your own, brat. Now, while Iosef prepares a defense, John literally digs up his old life by smashing through concrete to attain his weapons. Vigo attempts to reason with John, but he won't listen. Worth noting is that Vigo's plea is to discuss the matter like civilized men. And this is a concept that comes up a lot in the John Wick movies. This idea of civility in a world of violence is treated in a manner that seems to present order, which is itself kind of a joke in these movies where emergency services don't ask too many questions, the state police and military are non-existent, and the civilians don't seem to react to all the murders unfolding all around them in broad daylight. There's also some amusement in how John Wick's nickname in the criminal underworld is the Baba Yaga. Everybody in the film keeps using this term to refer to him as the boogeyman, but this description does not fit the Baba Yaga in Slavic mythology. The Baba Yaga is meant to be an old witch who eats people and lives in a hut with chicken legs. That doesn't sound like John Wick at all. Now, some people view this as an error, considering that Vigo refers to John less as the boogeyman and more as the man you hired to kill the boogeyman. I, however, think of it more as a joke about how flawed this world really is, despite the presentation of control and decadence. This is a society where hitmen follow rules that they speak of with such professionalism, yet those rules are constantly broken. In other words, the criminal underworld doesn't understand John Wick by attributing an inaccurate nickname to his legacy. While on his revenge quest, John makes a stop at the Continental, an upscale hotel managed by John's old friend Winston, played by Ian McShane, and maintained by the stern yet courteous concierge Sharon, played by Lance Reddick. The Continental has its own rules, where no killing is permitted on its grounds. We see the consequences of those actions when John is targeted by the hired assassin Perkins, only to be gunned down later for breaking the rules. Before getting back into the world of violence, Winston warns John about the dangers of his return. But this is important to John. He knows that if he doesn't fight back, any egotistical crime leader could just bust into John's house to steal his car and murder his pets. Today it's a puppy, but tomorrow it could be a cat. It's worth noting that on John's violent path, he gets all dressed up for the occasion. Consider his initial assault on Eoseph. John is dressed in a suit with determination while Eoseph flees in a towel when confronted at his pool, surrounded by women who love him and men who protect him. This framing makes John's defiance against a perceived powerful man all the more rebellious. Eoseph is a younger man with wealth, power, women, and a revealing body, but in comes the older John Wick, all by himself in a suit and tie, defying the forces that control his world. Because John is committed to taking down dozens of men all by himself, many have come to view John as a Sigma male. The term is typically understood to mean a self-reliant man who operates alone, short on words but big on actions. I understand that designation based on the action scenes, but where that designation falls apart is in the scenes that don't involve action. Because John does not operate alone. During some fights, John is aided by the sniper Marcus. John relies on Winston to grant him a safe hotel room. He relies on fellow Continental guest Harry to watch over Perkins to ensure that she is punished for breaking the rules. And not only does Winston execute Perkins for defying the Continental rules, but immediately following this scene, Winston gives John info on where to find Vigo. And that devotion is something that John doesn't just brush aside. Consider that by the end of the second act, John has accomplished his mission. He successfully kills Eoseph and can return home for having killed the man who killed his dog. But when Vigo informs John that Marcus was killed for his involvement, that just doesn't sit right with John. So he returns to the city to kill Vigo in the film's thrilling conclusion. Throughout the final battle, and much of the film really, Vigo repeatedly stresses that John cannot change. He stresses that John is bound by his environment that he cannot alter, much as men can't escape what society has dictated for them. This societal acceptance is pushed for by Vigo, who during the climax tries to appeal to John's upbringing by remarking, "We were professionals, civilized." To which John replies, "Do I look civilized to you?" Ultimately, John kills Vigo and stumbles into an animal clinic where he adopts a new dog. The grieving man can now grieve in peace with his dog. Right after he gets his car back in Chapter 2. 2017's John Wick Chapter 2 opens with John getting his car back. Peter Stormare, playing Eosev's uncle, talks about how legendary John Wick is, telling the story of the time that he killed with a pencil, a story implied to have been told many times before based on the reactions to it. After fighting his way through many Russian hitmen, John calls a truce with the Russian leader on the condition that he get his car back. While they share a drink for John's declaration of peace, the Russian leader asks John, "Can a man like you know peace?" To which John remarks, "Why not?" Once again, defying those who say that men are bound by a systemic order, not with some grand philosophical reasoning, but a mere, fuck you with your stupid world, try to stop me, bitch. So John returns home with his Mustang reacquired and a new dog to grieve with. He buries his weapons back in the concrete and should be done with that part of his life. But of course, this lifestyle will not allow John to retire. Ringing John's doorbell is the hitman Santino, and he's calling in a favor. It's a favor that John cannot deny as it's part of a blood oath type marker. This favor that John received was apparently the one that helped him escape the criminal underworld. But John seriously wants to cast aside that life and denies Santino that request. So Santino goes from asking to demanding, by blowing up John's house. And while the dog survives, don't worry, he's fine, John is still pissed about this reaction. It is once John goes to speak with Winston at the Continental where we learn just how grand this criminal underworld is. Managed by the authority known as the High Table, assassins and criminals all operate on a separate level from the rest of society. They have their own rules, safe zones, traditions, and even a specific currency. After watching Winston approve their new coinage, he tells John that there's no way out of Santino's blood oath. Under this system, Santino is permitted to blow up John's house. With no other options, John just agrees to Santino's demands. In this case, it's taking off to Rome to assassinate Santino's sister of Gianna in order for him to gain a seat at the high table. These are the rules that John must abide by, and he does so in a manner that some might read as stoic. Okay, so just for the moment, we need to discuss Stoicism. So, Stoic ethics favor self-control to overcome destructive emotions. This aspect is about recognizing what you can and cannot control, and how it's important to focus on what you can control when it comes to your emotions. Many people tend to misread Stoicism as being more about being free of emotions. Hence, some audiences believe that John Wick is stoic given his focused and quiet nature when it comes to killing. But John isn't free of emotions. He is entirely driven by anger and grief in his bloody quest. If anything, John Wick is waging a war against Stoics, because another way to read Stoicism is finding order in chaos. The world of the high table is one of perpetual assassinations and murders, but it is ordered. There are rules, ranks, and special currencies and safe zones where killing is permitted. John initially abides by these rules until someone does not. And while John may play by these rules when they suit him, he will also break them when they do not. But of course, there are plenty of people willing to break these rules. For example, John can't take off to Italy without someone to watch his dog, and Sharon, ever the gentleman, offers to watch John's dog, even though the Continental does not offer boarding services. Sharon is the best character. Now, John's arrival in Italy gives us a bigger picture of how deep this underworld really is. There's an Italian Continental hotel, run by the manager Julius. The same rules apply, but it is revealing that the only deal-breaking question that Julius asks John is if he's come to kill the Pope. Yes, this is a world where the Pope is off limits. Absolutely no popicide is allowed in Italy. I think some people who go back and watch the first movie might assume that this expanded world was planned from the start. The truth is, it really wasn't. Again, from Basil Ewanik, quote, "I think we were playing with the House of Money at that point, and we were like, fuck it, let's go for it. Let's expand the world. Let's make it crazy. Let's go to Italy. Let's have an Italian Continental. Let's have bigger roles for Ian McShane and everything else. Why play it safe now? We're playing with a House of Money." And that move was embraced. It was kind of the validation of, okay, this wasn't just a you killed my dog movie. People like it for what it is, not just the novelty of the dog. So John targets Gianna during her coronation and corners her in her dressing room / bathroom, considering there's a bath in the room. Gianna is well aware that she is being targeted and is well aware of the reasons why her brother wants her dead. She doesn't beg with John to spare her life, nor does she put up a fight. Instead, she questions what John is doing and what his late wife Helen would have thought of him now. Although meaningful, this questioning doesn't catch John off guard because Helen is the whole reason that he's been fighting back. And sure, the dog too, but more so Helen. Gianna then disrobes, gets into the bath, and slits her wrists. And when John asks why she did this, she says that she decided how she lived and will decide how she dies. She takes control of her life in the same way that John does. She reveals all of herself and exposes more of John's soul in her final moments. Her last conversation has her asking if John fears damnation, and he admits as much. She also confesses that she always thought that she could escape it. Another woman has died and left John with greater wisdom about how to live and how to die. John's fight isn't over after this, and not just because he has to fight his way through all of Gianna's henchmen. Santino's lead hitman of Ares, played by Ruby Rose, intends to execute John Wick, thus wiping away any chance that John has of coming back and getting revenge that he's entitled to. Additionally targeting John is Cassian, Gianna's bodyguard, played by Common. The dynamic between John and Cassian is unique, as they both recognize the roles that they've been forced to play. When they first lock eyes, Cassian doesn't question if John killed Gianna, instead just asking, "Are you working?" And when John says yes, there's an acknowledgement of the unfortunate nature of the fight they know they must have. But the rules still apply, and when their fight bleeds into the Continental, they've got to play nice and have a drink at the bar. Their fight gets postponed, as does the one with Ares, who is also at the bar. In addition to being skilled in all manner of combat, John Wick apparently speaks every language. This includes sign language, as revealed in his interactions with the mute Ares. Although her framing could be seen as a woman being silenced in this world, her limitations with communication places her on the same level as John, who speaks only in short sentences with direct, blunt word choices. If John was able to connect with Cassian in their shared quest for revenge, then John and Ares connect more through their communication styles. That and, well, fighting, but that's everybody in these movies, really. So, with John still alive, Santino decides to play it safe by taking out a contract for the execution of John Wick once he gets back to New York City. When he starts making his way to the Continental, every assassin comes out of the woodwork. And they don't even wait for a moment to corner John. The moment they get the text message that there's a price on his head, they immediately attack him in public. And this is a good time to note how nonchalant the general public is about so many fights and murders. There are no reactions from the passing people about guns being brandished, or people getting stabbed, or the bleeding, or the dead bodies. This is likely because they're used to this life of people getting murdered on the streets regularly, and just don't get involved by looking the other way. It's also quite funny. Seeking some refuge after killing Cassian, John Wick runs into the movie's homeless tribe of the Bowery, led by the Bowery King, played by a boisterous Lawrence Fishburne. So, the Bowery King lives a more satisfying life, lording over an underground kingdom where he doesn't need anybody's help. This includes John Wick, but John makes a pretty convincing case for allowing him to be armed. John stresses that the High Table could go to war with this tribe unless something is done. So he tells the Bowery King, "Do you want a war, or are you going to give me a gun?" To which the Bowery King responds to his men, "Somebody get this man a gun!" But even after arming John, the Bowery King says that John owes him. John, however, warns him by stating, "You don't want to owe me," stressing the dangers of being in debt and calling in favors. John's tracking of Santino leads to an art exhibit where he hunts him through a hall of mirrors. As John shoots and punches his way through this disorienting environment, there's an overhead voice describing the exhibit. The exhibit is meant to highlight the reflections of the soul and reflective contemplation for all who experience it. This seems like an ideal place for Santino to once more bring up the fact that John is bound to this world. Amid the confusing reflections, Santino remarks, "Killing me won't stop the contract and make it so much worse. You're addicted to vengeance." Santino isn't wrong, but he molded John into the killer that is tracking him down at this very moment. So there's an incredibly cool fight that John has with Ares, and after brutalizing her, they depart with a common farewell for John's biggest targets. That saying is, "Be seeing you." Not goodbye or go to hell, but an admission that John will be running into his enemies again, either in combat or in the next realm. It's the acknowledgement that there is no peace in John's life. He either fights or dies. What else is there for a man to do? So John fights and decides to break the arbitrary rules that have been consistently broken. Specifically, he breaks the rules of the Continental by bursting inside, finding Santino, and executing him right there. Every rule is broken. Even Winston will go against the High Table's rules by giving John a head start and temporarily pausing the contract on John's life. But all this rule breaking has consequences, which is what follows in the sequel. 2019's John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum, picks up immediately where the last film left off. John runs for his life through the streets of New York, preparing for the onslaught of assassins coming after him. Don't worry, The dog is still fine, though. The dog did follow John out of the Continental, but John ensured that Sharon would take care of him. I think it's a shame that Lance Reddick is no longer with us, because I would just love to see a short film of just Sharon caring for Wick's dog at the Continental. I mean, that would be it'd just be like such an adorable short film. After the cool opening fight scene in the library, John gets fixed up at the local doctor mere minutes before his contract is activated. And even though the doctor stops his surgery the moment the contract starts, he still points out the drugs that John needs for his injuries. The rules are broken. And the only way the doc believes he won't be targeted by the High Table is if he is shot twice by John, which of course John obliges, desiring not to place more people in his crosshairs unnecessarily. The problem is that John has already ensured that so many people will be punished for his actions in the previous movie. A High Table adjudicator, played with a no-nonsense attitude by Aisha Kate Dillon, arrives to exact the consequences for these actions. Winston is due to lose his power over the Continental for aiding John. The Bowery King receives 7 lashes for providing John with 7 bullets, even though he's not the least bit intimidated by this display of power. Even John's most recent interaction with his old stomping grounds of the Roscaroma pay a price for granting John safe passage out of the city. Worth noting about the adjudicator is that the character's gender is never stated, but Aisha Kate Dillon is non-binary. I like the idea of this character not being bound by gender and deciding on punishments for men and women in this world. The adjudicator does not empathize with the male ego or women's assertions in this mostly male criminal underworld. Nor can the other characters appeal to the adjudicator on this level. The adjudicator is the perfect antagonist, as one who is entirely bound by the rules and weighing the best moves for asserting the High Table's authority. They are also controlled and level-headed in a way that no other antagonist in these movies are. And while there is no fight scene involving the adjudicator, it would have been cool to see. While John's associates suffer in New York, John seeks a High Table elder in Casablanca, which, yes, also has its own Continental. Finding this elder means John will have to contact the assassin Sophia, played by Halle Berry. John is calling in his favor using the same type of marker that Santino forced on him. The difference here is that John can empathize with Sophia's plight and her bitterness at initially refusing to help. Consider that John was responsible for rescuing Sophia's daughter, but it also meant that her daughter had to go into hiding to stay safe. They can identify with each other given that John knows the pain of losing a loved one. So she reluctantly agrees to bring John to her old boss to figure out where to find the elder. John's defiance of the High Table does have an impact on Sophia, but perhaps in a cyclical manner that John did not expect. In the previous movie, Winston insisted that John not spill the blood of a High Table member in the Continental, and he did anyway. Sophia could have avoided conflict if she had just gifted her old boss one of her dogs as payment for an audience. And despite John's pleas not to escalate, she does anyway, given that her boss shot her dog. Don't worry, the dog lives. In fact, both her dogs engage in this grand shootout at the Casbah. And it's very cool. There is something tragic about how John connects with Sophia. Both of them are in a similar situation where they cannot escape their dangerous life and fear for their loved ones. They can't connect or work together after this event because it's too dangerous to have such associations. If it weren't for the High Table, these two might be friends. But because of the system in place, this man and woman can't be on that level. It's also worth noting how much angrier the women are in these movies. They are rightfully more emotional than the men, who have grown too accepting of this system. In the case of Sophia and the Roscaroma director, both are expected not only to care for children, but also to protect them while at the same time protecting their own necks in a dangerous society. So even though John receives help from both, it is with the harshest tones. When John calls in his favor from the Roscaroma for safe passage, he still has to endure the painful burnings of a cross into his flesh. And when John calls in Sophia's favor, she greets him with a bullet. There is a strong reluctance among the women to help John Wick, because even though he's fighting back against a system that has oppressed them, they also don't have the safety of fully backing his efforts. They'll still point out where he needs to go, but also only after spitting in his face for all the pain that he has caused. So John eventually finds the elder and they discuss what John wants out of life. Ultimately, John wants to live to maintain the memory of the love that he had for his late wife. The elder agrees to forgive John for his crimes on the condition that he kill Winston and remain subservient to the high table for the remainder of his life. Oh, and also, John has to cut off his ring finger to pledge loyalty. That finger also has his wedding ring. So it's mutilation for forgiveness. A man surrendering his body and his grief to a power structure that controls him. On his way to the Continental, John runs into more assassins, including the swordsman Zero, who was specifically hired by the Adjudicator. Their fight continues throughout the streets of New York City until they reach the Continental and they have to stop fighting. And while John awaits to meet Winston, Zero sits next to him and just gushes like a fanboy. This assassin hired to kill John is all giddy that he finally gets a chance to sit and admire the John Wick. He also gets to meet the dog as John is reunited with his dog. So Zero's fanboy nature is hilarious for how it speaks to the absurd idolization of such a character and how this movie's world is incredibly absurd even when not engaged in thrilling action sequences. So when John confronts Winston, Winston offers him the option to shoot him since he's losing everything. Much like Gianna, Winston also wants to choose how he dies, given how much power he had when he lived. He'd also much rather die at the hands of a friend than a cruel system. But Winston also asks John about choosing his own fate as a man. He states, quote, "The real question is, who do you wish to die as? The Baba Yaga, the last thing any man ever sees, or as a man who loved and was loved by his wife? Who do you wish to die as?" Realizing that Winston is also fed up with the high table, the two of them refuse the demands of the Adjudicator. And having pissed off the high table, the rules of the Continental are removed and assassins target the building. This leads to the extended sequences in which John and Sharon lay waste to waves of gunmen and swordsmen entering the building. All of this goes down while Winston sits back and drinks, trying not to get in their way as they arm themselves and reload in between battles. The climax of this grand display of violence is the glass office fight between John, Zero, and a few other admirers of John Wick, and they're willing to prolong the fight if only to enjoy the most exhilarating aspect of their jobs. Something I want to point out here is that the third movie has action sequences that go on even longer than before. There's a heavier body count, more stabbings, more slashings, more destruction, and just way more crashing through glass. Some might say these lengthy moments of violence make the film too simplistic, relying more on kinetic energy than the dialogue to drive the story. But the way I've looked at these movies is akin to the ballet, because ballet is a performance art that conveys emotions and storytelling through dance, much in the same way a movie communicates its world and characters' plights through its scenes of gunfire and fistfights. And this association isn't just because Chapter 3 literally features ballet at the Ruska Roma. Dan Lautzen, the DP of this movie, admitted this outright. Once more from the book, They Shouldn't Have Killed the Dog, quote, "It's a ballet. You can see that very easily in Chapter 3. Director Chad Stahelski is so amazing to design all the action, along with Keanu, so it is really a ballet. The knife fight sequences are so much a ballet. It's action, of course, but it's very, very stylishly done." The fighting continues with John finally killing Zero and denying the standard "we're the same, you and I" banter that John has grown accustomed to. Although I do think it's amusing how much less poetic John gets when addressing these declarations. He's gotta be annoyed with how often these lines get repeated. When it becomes clear that the high table will not be able to wipe out John and Winston, the Adjudicator renegotiates. The Adjudicator stresses that the high table is powerful, but Winston bites back by reminding them that they're messing with New York City here. For his display of power, Winston is allowed to remain the manager of the Continental, provided he kills John Wick. And he complies by shooting John off the roof. Of course, John's body is not found on the street, and this is read as another breaking of the rules by Winston. So while Winston might be willing to do almost anything to stay in power, he also still tries to keep John alive because he has that much of a bond with him. The movie ends with John being taken in by the scarred Bowery King just as eager for revenge as John. He directly asks John if he's pissed off and wants to go to war, to which John simply replies, "Yeah." 2023's John Wick Chapter 4 is the final chapter, where John has had enough. He's not going to get anywhere killing off random assassins and needs to target the biggest figures to stress his point. And he makes that point clear by revisiting the Elder from the last movie. The Elder tells John that killing him won't undo the damage and the high table will continue with whoever is next in line. The Elder states, quote, "None of us can escape who we are. You've come a long way for nothing." To which John responds, "Yeah, not really," followed by him executing the Elder. Throughout this movie, there's an acceptance of death, a realization that you can't fight back against your own mortality. This is an aspect that Winston comes to terms with, especially when approached by the more cruel reign of the High Table's Marquis de Garmon, played by Bill Skarsgård. While entering this meeting, Winston speaks with Sharon about the final words of Ned Kelly, where he stated right before his hanging, "Such is life." Ned Kelly is worth mentioning as he was an Australian outlaw known for killing cops. Kelly wasn't just anti-cop, but also, as outlined in his manifesto, hated the Victorian government and the British Empire. It's fitting that Winston would be thinking of such a figure, even though it's mostly for the acceptance of death. It is something that Winston finds impressive and perhaps a courage he desires when facing his own death. But as Sharon states, Winston will not die during this meeting, and he's right. Because the Marquis kills Sharon. Okay, so this death probably hit audiences a lot harder when it premiered. Because I remember seeing this movie early, getting to this moment and being surprised that, at that point I was mouthing, "No, you can't kill off Sharon." But I remember thinking, Lance Reddick's performance was really good in these movies, and I can't wait to see what he does in his next big movie role. That same day, though, I got the news that Lance Reddick had died. It was heartbreaking to hear this, and I couldn't imagine how much more shocking it was for the audience who witnessed Sharon's death after having just heard of Reddick's death. So rest in peace, Lance Reddick. You were a wonderful part of the John Wick movies, and you had the funniest interview on the Eric Andre show.
I wish I would have.
So the Marquis additionally asserts his dominance by blowing up the Continental, denying Winston a chance to redeem himself. As he tells him, quote, "Second chances are the refuge of men who fail." The Marquis is not just evil because he kills people and blows up buildings, but because he wants to destroy any hope men have against fighting back at an unjust system. Although Winston stresses that he did shoot John Wick to adhere to the will of the High Table, the Marquis reminds him that this isn't about John Wick. It's about defiance and the idea that you can challenge authority. It's why the obliteration of the Continental and the murder of Sharon isn't so much about consequences for these actions, but the removal of identity. The Marquis humiliates Winston, who once identified as being more New York than High Table. But with the Continental gone and his role stripped, the Marquis states to Winston, "You are no longer New York. You are nothing." This isn't about John Wick in the same way that the movies are not just about a dead dog. It's about beating men down into a specific role and emasculating them if they dare to challenge the status quo. There are a handful of new characters introduced in this movie, each representing a different aspect of this society bound by the High Table. There's the blind assassin, Kane, played by Donnie Yen, who's forced out of retirement to kill John Wick to protect his daughter, whom he keeps at a distance. So, a similar situation to Sophia from the last movie, but on a more empathetic level, considering Kane really doesn't want to kill an old friend like John. Mr. Nobody, played by Shamir Anderson, is a tracking assassin bound by greed. Even though the Marquis threatens his life, Mr. Nobody also knows how to hold out for the biggest offer and when to demand millions more when the time is right. He comes to realize that money isn't everything because he has a dog that John ends up saving during a heated exchange of gunfire. Koji, the Osaka Continental manager, played by Hiroyuki Sanada, values John's friendship and offers him some wise words about recognizing that death is coming. He remarks that the only path this leads to is death. Nobody, not even you, can kill everyone. A good death only comes after a good life. To which John responds, "You and I left a good life a long time ago, my friend." We also see the damage this life can cause when family gets involved, as Koji's enraged daughter craves vengeance after her father is killed by Kane. And finally, there's Killa Harkin, played by Scott Adkins, who is just ridiculous. He's this towering power player who looks like he could be a Dick Tracy villain and cheats to stay alive in this world. He does, however, make for a good fight scene, the way that John beats the shit out of him at a club where the theme seems to be fire and water. The way John intends to humiliate the High Table is to essentially exploit the flaws in their own rules. This comes about when John challenges the Marquis to a classic duel of pistols. He's only able to make this request after pledging his loyalty to the Berlin branch of the Ruska Roma, which required him to execute Killa for this admission. Winston convinces the Marquis to go along with this duel by appealing to his ego. Of course, Winston only goes along with this so that he can be reinstated by the High Table, as he's still looking out for himself, even when looking out for John. And even though John and the Marquis are willing to abide by the rules of the duel, the Marquis will also cheat by increasing the bounty in Paris to make sure waves of hitmen will prevent John from making it to the duel on time. Said duel will involve Kane shooting at John, making for a finale where you're not sure who to root for here. Before John's journey through the French streets to the duel, he will meet Kane in a church where they talk about spirituality and their friendship. Neither of them want to kill each other, but they've been forced to, given the circumstances of a society that could not just leave men alone to grieve and spend time with their families. After getting all suited up and armed by the Bowery King, John and Winston have a meaningful talk about death and how they want to be remembered. And for John, he doesn't have to think twice about what he wants engraved on his tombstone. Loving husband. It's essentially the answer to the question Winston posed in the last movie, but restated to keep in mind what matters most in John's life. The film follows John as wave after wave of money-hungry hitmen target him through the streets. This includes a battle at the Arc de Triomphe where he fights through circling traffic, and it's the coolest fucking scene while highlighting the perpetual chaos of this world. There is also the scene where John battles his way through a building with an explosive weapon in overhead shots that look like something out of Hotline Miami. This is the second coolest fucking scene. And then there's the third coolest fucking scene where John battles his way up a massive flight of stairs only to be kicked all the way down them, get up again, and fight again. Finally, John engages in the duel with Kane, and through the loopholes in the rules and the ego of the Marquis, John Wick gets his satisfying kill with the fitting punchline of consequences right before he pulls the trigger. The Marquis is executed in a manner that the High Table abides by, impressing the serious Harbinger, played by Clancy Brown. Although John does not live to enjoy his freedom from the High Table's aggression, he does accomplish his goal of dying the way that he wants in a manner that will benefit the most people. John gets his gravestone with the title of Loving Husband, just as he wanted. Thus ends the life of John Wick. But not the John Wick movies. 2025's Ballerina is a side story / spin-off movie that takes place between the events of chapters 3 and 4. The film centers on Eve, a ballerina / assassin played by Ana de Armas, And I don't have too much to say on this film in terms of masculinity. I mean, this is mostly because it involves Eve going down the same path as John. That path involves seeking revenge, being raised in a structured world of killers by the Ruscaroma, and breaking that contract to attain vengeance. I will say, though, I did find it interesting how John Wick will interact with Eve as they cross paths in this movie. He tries to stress to Eve that this is a life that she can walk away from. Of course, she won't, because she has the same motivations as John to stay and make her aggressors pay. But when John is called in by the Ruscaroma to stop Eve from killing the cult behind her father's murder, he goes easy on her. He tells her to walk away from destroying the dangerous cult, and when she doesn't, John gives her roughly half an hour to do so before he kills her, and thankfully he doesn't. This is not so much John showing pity as it is paying forward the favors that he's been granted thus far. John was only able to survive and get his revenge with the help of others. There are rules, but many men and women in these movies choose to break them and accept the consequences. Even though John doesn't know Eve that well, he can empathize with her plight and grant her the same chances that he had. So even though Ballerina is more of a side story, it also presents John's war with the High Table as an inspirational force. Sure, Chapter 4 kinda did this, where John inspired a handful of people to rebel, but it was still cool to see him extend his thoughtfulness to a single person he barely knew. Oh, and also, Ballerina has the final appearance of Lance Reddick in these movies, and dueling flamethrowers. So yeah, I like this movie. If there is one constant throughout the John Wick movies and the dialogue, it's that opposing forces stress to John that he cannot change. The many killers that target John have grown to accept this cruel lifestyle that can't be changed. What can you do against corrupt figures like Santino and the Marquis? There doesn't seem to be much you can do, as John is told to forget it because it's Chinatown. But John Wick doesn't accept that and fights back anyway, sometimes by the rules and sometimes not. And the film explores this defiance against societal expectations for men like John in a manner that is equal parts exhilarating, stylish, and campy. The duality of the serious and the silly in these movies made them feel more engrossing than just a series of incredibly cool fight scenes. Men don't have to accept the cruelty bestowed on them by other men, especially when those other men kill your dog, which is why the John Wick movies kick so much ass beyond just Keanu Reeves looking cool in a suit, killing a lot of people, and saving dogs.